The ultimate all-in-one electric homebrewing system is here. The new Grainfather G40 can produce up to 11 gallons of beer and features all the latest advancements in homebrewing technology, including wireless control so you can monitor your brew day from the Grainfather app. With an innovative new grain basket design that improves workflow, reaching mash efficiencies of 75% or more is easy. The 3300-watt heating element brings your wort to a boil quickly without any scorching, and the large hot plate filter guarantees that no unwanted grain matter or hop trub reaches your fermenter. Every G40 comes standard with a high-powered built-in pump that can handle temperatures over 200 degrees Fahrenheit and a full 3-year warranty that guarantees you'll be able to keep on brewing no matter what. The Grainfather G40 is available now at your favorite homebrew retailer or online at grainfather.com. Today's show is brought to you by Imperial Yeast. You hear us gushing over Imperial Yeast all the time, and that's because their yeast performs for us in every batch that we brew. Imperial Yeast is adored by commercial breweries and home brewers alike. Their pitch-right pouches are jam-packed with over 200 billion fresh yeast cells, guaranteed to deliver flawless, fast fermentations every time. Imperial Yeast strains are grown by a team of pro brewers and home brewers who live to help other brewers learn more and ferment better. Join any recipe receiving tier of our Trub Club and get a free upgrade to premium Imperial Yeast with every recipe kit that ships out to you. Learn more at homebrewhappyhour.com/club and come brew with us.
Entertaining shows with content that spreads information and sparks discourse throughout the community. This is the Pearl Media Network.
Catching up and talking mead with Corrie Purser. This is Homebrew Happy Hour, episode 280. Hello and welcome to the Homebrew Happy Hour. This is the show where we supply the answers to your homebrewing questions and discuss all things related to craft beer. If you have a question you would like us to discuss on a future episode, go to homebrewhappyhour.com and click on that submit a question link at the top of the page. Now you can call or text them in by using 325-305-6107. I'm your host, Joshua Stubing. Today, I'm so happy to have her back. Let me read what I actually wrote down for her. I have Corrie Purser, a gluten-free ciderist and homebrewer out of California who has a popular Instagram at Miss_Cider, which is focused on brewing ciders and mead. Corrie, how are you doing?
I'm well. How are you, Josh?
Fantastic, except that it's miserably hot here in Texas. It's like 102. Well, you're in LA, right? I bet it's...
Yeah.
Is it miserably hot there as well?
Oh yeah, it's pretty warm these days.
Yeah. It doesn't need to be said any more than I'm in my office, which is like its own. I've carved it out of my garage, and it's like 150 square foot, not much. And I have my own little mini split thing, and I feel like I set it at like 68 or 70, which is cold, and it probably gonna cost me a lot, but it's still not cold enough in here. It might be the lights I have and all that. But anyways, I like your backdrop. I didn't ask you before we were recording, what is on tap right now? Is it a mead?
It's the mead that you have in the bottles that I sent you.
Yeah. Okay. Right on. Cool. So with mead, all right. I'll kick it off with asking you about this real quick, and then we'll get to asking how you've been and all that. Mead, is it like beer in regards to, do you keg it first and then bottle from that, or did you bottle first and keg the rest?
I usually keg first and then bottle. I don't know if that's what you're supposed to do with mead or not, but that's what I usually do with my cider. So I was just, making a big batch of mead, and I was doing it in the most simple way that I could, and maybe not the most traditional manner, but
that's how we do it with beer, or that's how I prefer to do it with beer. Keg it and then use like a counter pressure type filler and put it in bottles. That's way easier. Bottling, I'm imagining, with any beverage is not fun. Not true bottling, right?
Yeah, we've had that conversation, I think, in the last episode, that bottling's not our favorite.
Corrie, I try to bring that up in every episode just to remind people, why are you bottling? What's up with that? Anyway, so it has been, it's been a little over a year. I say a little over. It was January 2021. What's going on with Miss Purser these days? You still making cider, still making mead, and living gluten-free? How have you been?
I'm good. Yeah, I'm definitely living gluten free. I'm gluten, dairy, and egg free, mostly vegan.
Dang.
So I joke with people I'm a true Los Angeles girl now.
You are. Wow, you're legit Californian.
Yeah, and still making ciders, still making mead. It's been hard for me to get apples actually. My source of apples that I once had is no longer. So I'm waiting for fall to roll around again for me to be able to like go to, like farmers and get apples from them again so I can start making mead and fill up my deep freezer. But in the meantime, I've been exploring other ways to use my equipment, like making mead. I was planning on maybe doing a kombucha next or a seltzer even.
Hey, see that's future episodes for you to come on. I do like kombucha. No, hold on, I'm lying. Declare I like what kombucha does for my gut. I don't think I've ever actually tasted it and go, I like this.
I think what will be fun though is like extracting like my own flavor to add to it. So I was considering getting like fresh fruit and doing like an alcohol extraction maybe for the flavor of whatever I want to add to it instead of like adding like flavor packets.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. So I mean this as a compliment. You like to be, I was going to say, complicate the brewing in regards to like, I could go get these packets, but why would I want to do that? I'm a scientist, push up the glasses and like what's the thought behind that? You just want to be as involved as much as possible in the brewing process?
I don't know. I don't think, I mean, there's some great like flavors out there that you can purchase. But I mean, yeah, I'm a chemist.
Yeah, no,
I'm a chemist at heart. And I'm like, why would I buy it whenever I could just make it?
Totally. I wish I had that mindset or ability.
But it's complicated. And I think, yeah, I do like to complicate the process. And it's just kind of like it's like a craft almost, like why would you buy a dress? Or why would you make a dress instead of buying one? Well, because then you can make it exactly how you want it to be.
No, I hear you. And people will use my argument against me because sometimes I've been accused of being lazy because I say things like that, like, why would you do that if you can just buy it? And then people will go, well, why do you brew beer when you can buy better beer? And I'm like, well, first off, that hurts. They're not wrong, but yes, I could probably go buy better beer. But no, because I get what you're saying. It being as involved in the process as possible, it just makes it more enjoyable, right? It's you feel more connected to it. And again, you being a chemist, that's just push up the glasses and nerd out with chemistry, because basically brewing is janitorial and chemistry, right? That's the two main components of brewing.
And some biology with the yeast.
Biology, there we go too. See, I'm not good at the sciences, Corrie. Last time we had you on, it was all about cider. I have to confess, I think I told you I'm pumped up. I'm going to brew a cider. I still haven't. Todd.
I was supposed to send you a recipe too, and I never did.
Oh, it's your fault. There we go. See that's why I haven't. Corrie, that was I'm calling you out. No, Todd and I made a cider from one of those you basically, everything's given in front of you and you just pour it all together and stick it in a closet, and it did not turn out very good. So,
oh no.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about it. But no, it was inspired by a lot, and Todd was like, "Oh, those expiration dates don't mean anything," and I think they do. I think they're
like the juice one.
Yes, the juice. Yeah. Yeah, and I think the expiration dates were put on there for a reason in this case, because it didn't turn out very good. I think he might actually still have it in that fermenter, thinking time will be on its side, but it's been a long time. I don't think time is going to save this batch. But we talked all about cider and all that, and I knew you did mead, but last time it was basically all about cider. This time, like you mentioned on your Instagram, and we had talked about before, like mead, has that been your main focus, or are you still splitting up your time between various alcoholic endeavors?
So this mead is the longest that I've let condition. So I've tried to do mead in the past, and I just did like very basic meads, just straight honey. And I never really liked them that much because mead kind of has like a funky flavor to it sometimes, So I don't know if you mentioned that you've had meads in the past, but they're kind of funky, right?
Yeah, I've had two in my life. Both at a homebrew con, and one of them was way too sweet, and it was not what I wanted to enjoy that night, because I wasn't thinking like that much sweetness when it's like 11 p.m. and the club noises or whatever. Like, nah, I don't want that sweetness. And the other one was funky. That's the best way to describe it. They called it a melomel, I think that's technically a mead, right?
Yeah, I think melomel is whenever you add like other fruit to it.
Okay, well, that's what it was, but that one was funky, as it like almost like Corona in the yard funky. Like it wasn't enjoyable.
So I kind of describe it as like a muskiness that it sometimes has. Like sometimes whenever you drink mead, like it'll have like this funky like muskiness to it. I don't know how to describe it other than that. And I really should have looked up the chemical component since we're going to be talking about things like that today. But I didn't, but that's what I tell people. I'm like, that mead kind of has like a funky, like muskiness to it. Right.
And that's inherent is what you're saying to all meads you've had or all mead.
Yeah. All the meads that I've had have kind of had that. Some of them, maybe not so much because the flavor is a little hidden. So what you have is like a melomel, but it's with strawberries is what I added to the mead this time. So this is the best mead that I've ever made. And I think it does need some improvement because there was an off flavor that was detected in it. And that was detected by GCMS, not just by tongue, which is gas chromatography, mass spectrometry, which is the instruments that I sell and my expertise.
Yeah, I love, first off, that you have access to that. Because I was asking you before we were recording, like, wait, I saw in your Instagram reel, you're like, oh, the lab detected an off flavor. But you were saying it wasn't like punch you in the face to you, right? To your palate, it wasn't like super noticeable.
No, and it's not really super noticeable because I think a lot, like whenever I send it to my lab, the company's called Gerstel, by the way. It's a German family-owned company, and we have headquarters here in the U.S. So I sell instruments for them, and they are like our niche is food flavor beverage. So whenever I sent my mead to them, our application scientist, Nicole Corrie, she has like an expertise in detecting off flavors and off aromas in any kind of consumer beverage or food product. So I sent it into them, and she did like a tasting panel with everyone there, and not many people could detect it at all. And she mentioned it to one other person, and she was like, oh yeah, maybe I do taste that a little bit. And the flavor is like medicinal Band-Aid. So have you heard that? Is that phenol? Yeah, phenolic. Yeah.
Okay, that's what. Yeah, I only know that because I've had it in like more batches than I care to admit. But yeah, the phenol taste, where it's like, oh, yeah.
I shouldn't have told you that though. I should have let you taste it first, and then you tell me.
Well, I was just going to throw out one of the 4 words I know about all flavors and be like, oh, is that diacetyl? No, that's not diacetyl. That would be butter. You're right. I should pour it and taste it before I get. Or here, I'll start pouring and tasting it. But a lot of people, believe it or not, who listen to this have never brewed mead and don't know a lot about mead, mainly because we don't talk about mead on this show very frequently at all. Actually, Todd mentioned once that I made a mead and he used prickly pear tuna is what we call it, like the flour off the prickly pear is what he used for flavoring. But that was I want to say that was over a year ago, and he hasn't mentioned the mead, so I'm not sure if that still exists or if he's wanting to age it. So let's start with the basics of mead. Like, is mead at its core is honey, I know that, and water, and that's it, right? I mean, that can be a mead. It's just fermenting honey and water
and yeast.
Oh, and pardon me, you need something to ferment. Yeah. So being in 2022, there's probably a bunch of manufacturers of yeast that make specific ones for mead, but like back in the day, it was just wild fermentation, I'm assuming. And does any yeast work? Do you have your favorite types? Or let's just talk about the basics of mead and all that. I'll let you take it, whatever path you want to go down.
So mead is from honey. Not many people know that. And mead is more like a wine than I would consider like honestly, like cider's also considered wine, but mead like truly is more like a wine, I think, than even cider. I mean, I just say that because like it can be enjoyed stilled as well as carbonated. But I don't know. It's just so much heavier. I think like the viscosity of mead sometimes is just kind of like thicker. So I really do relate it more to a wine. And yeah, so it's from honey, and there are different like types of honey that you can buy. Like there's like a blueberry honey, there's like buckwheat honey, like there's all kinds of like different types of honey that you can buy, and they all have their own flavors and characteristics that will come out in the mead. So I went to a local like what's it called? Apiary, I guess apiary, for bees. And I like tasted a bunch of different types of honey. And so the base of the mead that you're tasting today, I think is from blueberry.
Okay.
So I fermented that. But recently you had a post about like how to brew whenever like you don't have like a lot of resources.
Yeah. On a budget.
Yeah, brewing on a budget. Yeah. So I made a comment and I was like, well, I just kind of use what I have.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
So that's what I did with this batch. I just used champagne yeast.
Well, I was gonna it's funny you say that. Well, when you may have been planting buds. I'm very impressionable, Corrie. When you said it was more like wine, I was smelling. I was like, it kind of smells like a wine. And as I tasted it just now, I was thinking it's kind of champagne-y in regards to the crispiness. I don't taste phenol at all. And I might have the world's worst palate. I smoke cigars way too much. And so maybe I burned my palate. I don't taste phenol at all. I mean, did you, after they told you that, could you taste it or I don't
know.
I don't smell it. I don't taste it.
I kind of do smell it now after they mentioned it, but I don't know. Like, it's just like sensory analysis. I think it just kind of plays tricks on your brain sometimes. And some people have like such refined palates, and it's like really great. Like whenever I do like judging competitions, it's like you don't brush your teeth before you judge. You don't like drink orange juice or coffee. Like you have to go in there like with a very clean palate. So sometimes it's really hard to detect like off flavors or certain notes that are at lower levels than others.
See, and because I didn't have coffee this morning, I mean, in my time, it's already after lunchtime and all that. I haven't eaten today. I haven't brushed my teeth in a week and prepared for this. No, I'm kidding about that part. But I didn't drink coffee and all that because I have made that mistake before when someone's like, give me an honest feedback. And I'm like, oh my gosh, but I just had a cup of coffee or I just finished lunch or whatever. And I can't give you an honest feedback right now because there's too much combating on my palate with what you're giving me. But I'll say with yours, no, I like it. It's very, I was going to say it's not as sweet as I've been under the impression mead is supposed to be. I guess like cider or beer, there's a spectrum of accepted, like sweet is one end of that spectrum, but this is dry. I prefer dry.
Yeah, I like things that are dry. So whenever I do like my process for fermenting, I usually let all of my fermentation batches go to dry. And then I'll back sweeten or I'll add like flavors after conditioning. So yeah, and I love champagne yeast because it like kind of cleans up the base more, I think, than you would with other stuff. Like I've brewed with ale yeast before, and yeah, you get totally different characteristics whenever you're going from one yeast to the next. And Saison, I've done Saison yeast before, and I've kind of liked like the spiciness kind of that characteristics that you get with Saison. So it's fun just from like a homebrew perspective, I think, to like have the same base of whatever you're making, whether it be cider or mead, and then just do like a bunch of 1 gallon batches and put like different types of yeast in each batch, and then taste from that and see which yeast that you like to work with the best. And so I've done that in the past where I've done ale yeast, I've done Saison, I've done champagne. And I was like, well, out of all of these, I really like champagne. So I'm just going to buy a bunch of champagne yeast to keep on hand and then just use champagne yeast most of the time.
And so I'm assuming then with that, you're a bigger fan of dry yeast than you would be with liquid yeast. Is that mainly because it's cheap and easy to store?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So whenever I used to brew all of the time, like every time, like any of my carboys were empty, I would be like, I need to put something in there. But the older I've gotten, the more my time has been occupied with other things, like, my day job.
Yep.
Like it's just so time consuming, and I'm not making the most quality batches whenever I'm trying to just like fill up, all of the carboys that I have. So these days I'm trying to focus more on making quality batches whenever I do make them, and make them in larger quantities. I only brew in 5-gallon quantities.
I typically brew now in 10-gallon batches, but with Mead, is it a beverage? I mean, would you brew it like how home brewers, a 5-gallon batch? Is it going to be objectively more expensive because of the cost of honey and stuff? Or do you find that the price is typically in line with certain homebrew recipes as well? I mean, obviously that's a broad question, because homebrew recipes, if you're brewing a Belgian triple or like a double IPA, that's going to be a lot more expensive than the Kolsch that I'm brewing and drinking. But is your average Mead 5-gallon recipe going to be a lot? Because it's probably 12 or 13 pounds of honey at minimum.
Yeah, let me see. I was gonna say,
You have your recipe?
Yeah, I have my recipe. I can't remember how many pounds of honey this was. It was a lot, though.
When honey's not good, honey is not cheap, right?
No, yeah, it's not cheap at all. I think maybe I spent altogether $100 to $200 on 5 gallons of mead.
Yeah, I believe you. I mean, with the cost of stuff, groceries aren't getting cheaper.
Yeah, so the honey is definitely the most expensive price point on that, and yeah, I literally like bought like whenever I send you the photo for this, I'll send you like the picture of the bucket, and it's like a big bucket of honey, and it's either 5 pounds or 10 pounds, I can't remember. But you can make it as diluted as you want. Like if you want to add more water to that, then you're just going to bring down the flavor and the alcohol content when you do. So I think you can play with it some, but I mean, yeah, you don't want a very watered down mead, because then it's going to taste watery. It's not going to have that many flavorful characteristics to it. But you can add other things to it too. Like I added strawberries to this in addition to the honey.
And I was going to say that they're not punching the face. I like it. It's it is champagne-y in its overall kind of, I was going to say presentation. That's the wrong word, but flavor. It's very pleasant. What is the ABV on this? Because I feel like it's boozy.
It's 11%.
Okay, that's. I was like, I got halfway through my Stubing's Brauhaus glass, and I was like, hey, wait a second, my face feels flush. All right, I'm gonna slow down. I got stuff. Yeah, I got stuff to do today, Corrie.
Yeah, so that's why I say mead is definitely more like a wine than it is a beer, because cider is high alcohol. It's like 6%, but it's not nearly as like high as like a wine or a mead is. That's why I kind of equate it closer to a beer, because of the percent alcohol.
And this, I don't want to criticize your carbonation, because I don't think it is still right. Is how you sent it.
Well, okay, so I have it on with beer gas, and this is again brewing with a budget.
I love it.
And being lazy too. So I had beer gas left over from the last time that I tried to do coffee. I did coffee on nitrogen. So I have, the nitrogen tap on, and I have the beer gas instead of like CO2. So I ran out of CO2. I didn't have any. So I was like, I'm just going to put this on with my beer gas. And so, you know what beer gas is, right?
Yeah. Okay. I don't know the entire compound, but I know that it's not fully nitrogen. It's nitrogen and CO2, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I was going to say your fan base, I'm pretty sure, is pretty knowledgeable.
Totally.
But if you're a newbie and you don't know what beer gas is, yeah, it's a mixture of nitrogen and CO2. Yeah. So that's what I used for this. And I was kind of like it, and whenever I pour it, it does have like that nitrogen effect where like the bubbles come up, like whenever you get coffee on nitrogen. But it's not like bottling nitrogenated beverages is really hard to do, to retain that. Like there's a whole industry behind like canning and bottling using nitrogen.
Yeah, well, a lot of them have those widgets, right, to maintain the integrity of the nitrogen. Like it's extra cost. It's like, yeah, like you said, it's not easy for a home brewer.
It's not. So I kind of liked that idea of it having like that creamier kind of texture because of the nitrogen. But I don't know. At the end of the day, I'm like, I really wish that it was more sparkling though.
Well, I wonder if, because the mouthfeel is very smooth. And now that makes sense that was probably from the beer gas doing that. I don't know. I like how it finished right now, because it's carbonated, but it is not like champagne level of sparkling. But it is smooth. Like I said, I got to take it easy and put that down real quick, because it's too smooth. I thought you were telling me about off flavors and this and that. I was like, okay, I'm going to be polite. I'm going to sip it and then be like, no, I don't taste any off flavors. And then I'll never have it again. No, that's nice. When you're comparing it to wine, I'm almost thinking, yeah, this is like celebratory type beverage. This is not like I'm out at the bar type beverage. Right? And I'm assuming traditionally mead has never been that way though, right? It's never been, we're drinking 10 bottles tonight. It's probably been we're going to share a bottle and then go to bed early.
That's what I would call it. Yeah. It's just such high alcohol content, and whenever you go to meaderies, I haven't been to one actually, but there is some that are local that I should go to. But I've been to, there's one that does cider and mead. So I've had, a lot of tasters from them before, but yeah, they'll usually give you like a smaller volume of a taster for the mead versus like their cider. And a lot of times the people who are tending bar there, like, know that not many people are as familiar with mead, and they'll be like, that this is like high alcohol content, and that's why it's a smaller amount that we serve and all of that.
Yeah, I've been to breweries where, they serve their Imperials in 8 ounce, or maybe even a 10 ounce. And people are like, no, I want a pint. Like, we can't. No, we can't. Like, liability or something, right? And cost. It would be expensive to get a pint of that, but.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, like we were saying, sometimes mead is more pricey to make just because the honey is more expensive.
Yeah, that's crazy. I was going to ask about, so people who didn't maybe listen to our episode with you last year and don't know, you had an autoimmune disease you discovered in your adult life, or actually, pardon me, in your teens, right? Is when you had discovered it. This is all what led you to the gluten-free path was.
Yeah. Yeah. So whenever I was in college, an undergrad student, I developed an autoimmune disease called alopecia areata, and it actually made all my hair fall out, and I was completely bald, and I was missing one of my eyebrows too. So I went all of the options that you could, the routes that you could, for treating the autoimmune disease. I had, injections into my scalp. What is it called? That you do whenever you have like the issues with like inflammation in your joints.
Oh, like cortisol or
cortisone. Yeah.
Or cortisone.
They would do cortisone injections into my scalp and to reduce the inflammation, because your immune cells are like attacking your hair follicles, and that's why your hair falls out. So I did that. I had like a cream that I put on that was like basically like a chemical burn on your scalp, and then it like makes those autoimmune cells like dissipate, because like the other immune cells that like kill the burn come in, and then your hair starts to grow back because of that. But then it falls out again. I was on immunosuppressants. And I eventually had to stop taking immunosuppressants because immunosuppressants aren't good for you to be on long-term, and my blood pressure started to increase. So everything would work maybe short-term, but not long-term. And then I found a journal article from a researcher at Columbia University who understood like the genetics behind the autoimmune disease. And she related it to like, or she said it shares the same genetic mutation as celiac disease, as rheumatoid arthritis. And so I just kind of started playing with my diet at that point to see if my diet could be related. I had some like obscure friend that was like, oh, you should try being gluten-free. And I was like, why did I need to be gluten-free? Well, that's why, maybe because the genetic relation between the two diseases. So then I was gluten and dairy-free, and my hair started to come back. And then recently I started having issues again, and I tried being egg-free, and that seems to help as well.
That's fantastic. Obscure friend. Thank you for recommending that to her. That's incredible that you're able to make changes. Like right now, like you said, if something where I have a friend with Lyme disease who's had to do the same thing with certain supplements. And then he's told me the dietary changes made the biggest effect in his overall health. He was like, I had no idea what that just the treats I was enjoying or the beverages I was enjoying were hurting me or hurting my recovery and that. So when you started discovering that, were you even into mead and cider before? I forget from the first time we had you on if you were already into those. You weren't, right? Like that lifestyle change brought you to this.
Yeah, not at all. I used to really enjoy beer. I like to drink beer. I would go to breweries with friends, and whenever you have to cut gluten out of your diet and you are a person that kind of like navigates that space, it's like that's your social circle. And then your social circle is gone because you can't enjoy those things. Or whenever you do go with them to the breweries, it's like you can't participate. So it's like it's kind of a damper. And even now, sometimes I'll go to breweries and I'll be nervous because maybe they have a seltzer on tap, but maybe it's cross-contaminated. I don't know.
I was going to segue to that and ask you because seltzers, since we've last spoken, have really blown up. I mean, they were big in January 2021, but not like they are today where every brewery seems to have a house seltzer, even, microbreweries around the block, not to mention the macro breweries and how much seltzers they're packaging and distributing. But I didn't even think about cross-contamination. Can that be an issue, I guess, with even if a brewery's serving a mead or something? Like, do you have to, if you go to a place that has gluten-type products there, you just have to ask them, like, hey, was this vessel ever containing beer in it or something like that? Because I imagine the smallest amount, you're going to get inflammation pretty quickly.
Yeah, people who have celiac disease and my autoimmune disease, like it seems like the older that you get in life and you have these diseases, the more cross-contamination tends to bother you. Whenever I come in contact with things that are cross-contaminated or things that maybe have like a sneaky form of gluten, but it's not that much, it does impact me.
Back to the basics of mead, it's honey and water and yeast. We determined that it is always inherently gluten-free because I know I'm going to sound like a dummy, but I'm asking these questions in earnest because I just don't know a lot about mead. Honey is inherently gluten-free, right? Like I guess you could add stuff to it, but it is safe for that lifestyle where you aren't going to have to worry about gluten in honey.
Yeah, I don't think that you have to worry about gluten in honey. And I think most of the time mead makers don't add anything to mead to make it, not be gluten-free. But I mean, it's always good to, ask, or I mean, if you can label things as gluten-free and you go through like the process that, I don't know if it's the FDA or whoever regulates labeling, to label things gluten-free, it always I feel like it puts your consumers at ease that are gluten-free. Like if you can do it, then please do it. Because it puts me more at ease whenever I don't have to dig through an ingredient list or reach out and contact a company and all of these things just to be safe. Like if you can just slap that label on there, gosh, my life would be easy. Right. But I mean, I think you should always be precautious if you do have these things, because you never know, if you have a creative individual brewing, then maybe they'll be trying to make something that's more creative in their space. I don't know, a beer mead hybrid something right, or another. Yeah. I think it's always good to ask and be safe.
Yeah, absolutely. I hate harping on the gluten-free side of it. We do have listeners who have asked us for recipes for gluten-free beer because their loved ones or whatever, gluten intolerance, celiac specifically, seems to be more abundant than I've ever noticed. And that's my ignorance, because it's not like I'm on Reddit in that community or something, trying to find it, but it's very, what's the word? Not outspread, but there's more people than you'd think that suffer with these autoimmune issues. Adding the label to it would save a huge headache on people from having to do their own homework or just decide, you know what, I'm just not going to go out. I can't find this information. I'm just not going to come by anyway. It would save a headache.
I've done that a lot of times where I'll choose a restaurant that has labeled gluten-free things on their menu before I go to the restaurant that doesn't have that, because it just makes my life easier.
I'm a man of convenience, Corrie. I've said that. Again, I get accused of being lazy, but it's a man of convenience and efficiency. I was giving Todd a hard time earlier about the mead that allegedly still exists, but I'll expand on that. Mead does need to be aged, or it doesn't, because my understanding, I'll tell you, we went to a HomebrewCon 2017. That's the last time I've had mead, and we were sitting outside our hotel, and this group of mead what do you call someone? Brewers of Mead. We're sitting out.
Mead maker.
Mead maker. Thank you. The mead makers. It was this group of old guys, really nice and funny. And we're all just drinking, and they had all their mead. And the one that I tried was super funky. So I just was polite. But he was telling us, Charlie Papazian in the book, The Complete Joy of Homebrewing, mentions about needing to age it like 9 to 12 months. Or it was some long time. And these guys were like, no, you don't. That's bunk and blah, blah, blah. And then I was thinking, well, I tried your mead and it was funky. Maybe you should have let it sit for 9 months. But what is it about mead that makes time its best friend? Or is that a myth? Do you agree with these guys? Like, no, you don't have to age it. You can drink it in 40 days. Or what is the kind of magic timeline for mead?
I think it depends on your process. So if you are aging mead with your yeast cake, like still in it, and you haven't transferred it to secondary or even like, I don't know, like tertiary, even if it's like you didn't transfer it well the first time, then you're going to have off flavors that develop from the stress of the yeast and the yeast dying. So that's not a good way to condition it. And if that's the way you're conditioning it, then yeah, you should definitely like not let it sit on like a dead yeast cake for an extended amount of time. But if you transfer it properly into secondary and, you know, for the most part, you get rid of that first layer of yeast and you put it in secondary, then the idea is that any residual yeast that's in the liquid that hasn't settled to the bottom in the primary conditioning, then that's supposed to like clean up some of the like residual metabolites that have been formed during primary. So they kind of do like a little bit more work. The yeasts that are still alive and still floating around in the beverage are kind of like scavenging through the mead and cleaning it up and making it more refined. But I think it also adds to clarity too. So if you do still have yeast that is alive and in the liquid, and they do finally settle out and die or inactivate and settle to the bottom, then, or you have like other things that are in the mead. For example, I added strawberries to this. So if I have any like residual like seeds or something from the strawberry, then it allows like the clarity to come through more whenever you let it condition longer. But you can speed that up too. Like you can add, bentonite clay to a mead, and you can like the clumps of clay are like such large particles that it kind of like forces smaller particles down to the bottom.
Interesting. So would you like this batch? How long was it from brew day to keg?
8 months.
8 months. And was that because you took your gravity readings and it got to the point where you was ready, or that was like 2 months of primary and 6 months of secondary conditioning?
I think I usually only do like 1 month of primary. But yeah, usually I'll just wait and make sure that it's not bubbling anymore. I wouldn't let it wait longer than 2 months. I wouldn't wait 2 months probably in primary, because like I was saying, you'll eventually start to develop off flavors from the yeast that's died. And so, yeah, I think I usually at maximum do a whole month of primary conditioning for cider or for mead. But yeah, you want to watch the gravity and take gravity readings, or, watch it and make sure that it's not still fermenting whenever you do the transfer, because you still want the yeast to be working at that, primary conditioning point. And if it's still bubbling and going off, then the yeast is still doing its job.
Yeah. And for your process, you're using carboys. Are you using a thief when you're taking your gravity readings? Like a lot of people worry, especially for homebrewing beer, sanitation, get oxidizing the beer and ruining it. Then that's going to make that cardboard taste, which I'm also too familiar with my batches. But how do you safely take readings with mead? Is it similar to brewing beer?
I don't take readings.
Nice. So you just do your original and then a final.
Yeah, because like I said, I let all of mine go to dry because I like dry. I don't think you're supposed to do that with beer. I know some beer styles, you're supposed to take a gravity reading and in fermentation at a certain gravity, right?
I don't. Supposed to is very broad, Corrie. Todd takes 35 readings in a 12-day span. I take a reading when I'm putting it in the fermenter. And then as we're transferring it, I take the final gravity reading, and whenever it ends at, I'm like, that's what it ended at. Like, that's what we got.
Yeah, so that's what I do. And usually my final gravity reading tells me that it's dry and it's completely, all the sugar's been fermented.
Nice. So this was 8 months. It was what this one was. My follow up on that for secondary. So you have a month of primary. You transfer it so it's off that dead yeast cake and it's clarifying. Beer, I've kind of conflated secondary and cold crashing to be the same thing for my process. Like when I move to secondary, it's going in the fridge and it's just sit there however long until I either have the space for it or I remember, oh yeah, I got to take a keg to Todd. Is mead also benefiting from cold conditioning, or do you not put it in colder atmosphere when you're doing the secondary fermentation?
I imagine that any kind of like temperature control would be a good idea. But that's just not the biggest luxury that I have to be able to do temperature control. I can cold crash. And I think I would do cold crashing if I didn't have the time on my hands. Like I'd probably try to speed up that clarifying stage just by cold crashing. And I could see the benefit of doing it. But I mean, what would be most beneficial, I think, is to condition in a controlled temperature environment that makes the yeast most happy. And that's whenever you're not getting those bad off flavors.
Okay. So that I was trying to understand your process. So this batch was not cold crashed.
No,
nice.
I let it age at room temperature, whatever temperature my apartment is.
Yeah. No, I like that because again, this is making it seem so much more accessible to so many more people because like we have our Trub Club, we have tiers where people get recipes every month sent to them. I'm up there laboriously putting all these grains and grinding it. It's a real treat. But we don't usually do lagers because there are people in our Trub Club who are brand new and they don't have the equipment. They don't have, like you said, the luxury of being able to lager. You can MacGyver stuff, but it's not a convenient thing to tell someone, here's a lager recipe, now lager, because they're like, oh crap. Like it makes them more nervous. So we've just stuck to ales. But I'm not saying guys on the Trub Club were to do a mead. I'm just saying the fact that you don't have to have these, like as room temp is accessible to 99.9% of people with the technology listening to the show right now, right? Like they can do that in the 70s or whatever they keep their homes at. That's accessible, and it's good to know that you don't have to. But like you said, like with beer, cold crashing would probably help for at least clarity on the final product. But you didn't have any issue with that, which I imagine is thanks to the time that you spent in secondary.
Well, actually, whenever I did keg this, I was thinking to myself, man, I wish I would have added clay to this to make it more clear. But whenever I keg it, though, I'm essentially cold crashing it because it's in a keg by the time I put it in my kegerator, and my kegerator is, temperature controlled. So I mean, it's essentially cold crashed in addition to like the long, secondary conditioning step.
I was just saying, I got this after it was in the cold then, right? Because this is as clear as day. I was just saying, I don't know what you're talking about. This is like as clear as day.
Yeah. So like I said, I keg and put things on tap and then bottle it. So yeah, it's as clear as it's going to get without the bentonite clay being added.
It really did. I love one of the things we talked about on our show with our beer presentation. The brighter the beer, depending on the style, obviously. I love that. It makes me feel better because I hear from my co-host that 20 years ago when they were brewing and you get someone gives you a homebrew, it was full of yeasties in it still and particle, and people knew like, oh yeah, this is homebrew. Yeah, you made this. Where if you'd send someone this and pour it, just looking at it, it's pretty. They're already like, okay, the psychological part of the tasting, you've crossed off a very big thing, because if it looks grody, then people are going to think it's going to taste it, whether it actually does or not. And again, with yours, I'm still trying to find that phenol, and I really can't. If you wouldn't have told me it, I wouldn't have been able to guess any off flavor. So
like I said, whenever I make mead or cider, I tend to back sweeten or flavor after it's been conditioned. So that's what I did with this. I added strawberry juice to it, like that I crushed. I got to use my my juicer, my crusher, my apple crusher, and press some of the strawberries for the juice for it. So I added what I had left over from picking strawberries last year. I added to it from the freezer. And so I back sweetened it with strawberries, and I added some more honey to it as well.
So if they're, I can only speak on the contents of beer, but help me understand batch sweetening with mead. It's after primary, you've transferred to secondary. In theory, there's no yeast in there to start working again. Is that correct? Or how do you do something to make sure the sugars you're adding now aren't fermentable?
Yeah, so you can add what's the chemical?
Potassium metabosulfite? Is that no?
Yeah.
Is it the potassium metabosulfite?
Yeah, sulfites. You add sulfites to it to inactivate the yeast. There we
go. Thank you, Google.
So everyone is anti-sulfite. And
anti-sulfite?
Yeah, because they'll have bad reactions to it in their bodies, upset stomach, or some people I've talked to have experienced rashes because of it. And it's in wine, it's in, mead, cider. I don't know if they use it in beer, but a lot of times you add it to inactivate the yeast. So I add it at the beginning of fermentation, and it kind of sanitizes whatever you're using before you add the yeast. So I kind of kill any bacteria or any wild yeast before I add my champagne yeast. To again prevent off flavors. So I always use bottled water instead of tap water. So I don't really feel like there's a sanitary issue with that. But with the honey itself, I'm I don't know if it has bacteria in it or if it has natural yeast in it. So I don't like sours, and a lot of times you'll get a lot of sour flavors if you don't add sulfites. So I add sulfites to it at the beginning, and then I usually add sulfites at the end too. And then all it does is it activates the yeast. It doesn't kill it.
Right. And you're adding it to the end of primary, so that way you can batch sweeten because there's no more yeast activated to start up fermenting again.
Yeah. So that's what I usually do. With this batch, I didn't do that though.
Really? What did you do with this batch?
So I just forgot. I forgot to add sulfites to it at the end. So I was texting my lab and I was telling them that I'm as soon as you get this, you should put it in the refrigerator because any residual sugars that are in there are going to ferment and it might overcarbonate the bottle.
Bottle bomb. Oh yeah. Yeah. And these are nice bottles. That would hurt. The shrapnel on this would be painful. These Grolsch style, the swing tops. I like these. That's so funny. I like that. What is your process? Well, normally, here's what I do. You're a normal home brewer. I like that because sometimes it's intimidating when we talk and you're smart chemist and here's my process and I do all this. And I'm like, yeah, I follow the recipe that James gives me. And it's basically not red apron, blue apron, where it just, I have him in my ear going, now add this. Oh, I'm a brewer. But
yeah, I know people make mistakes, in work or in home brewing. You make mistakes and you just kind of work around those mistakes.
Yeah, you hear that, Todd? In work and in home brewing, people do make mistakes. We're human, Todd. We're human. I'm gonna use that for the video clip on my Instagram and tag Todd in it. That I made mistakes, Todd. I'm a human. I just celebrated 14 years with him at Keg Connection, so
nice.
He knows about my mistakes, Corrie. He knows all about it. Okay, so with your batch, we got is honey, water, yeast, and strawberries. That's all you used on it.
No, that's not it.
Did we already? Oh, I missed it.
So I also added some vanilla bean, and I added oak chips as well.
During secondary.
I think I added the oak chips during primary because I didn't want to add them during secondary because sometimes it's hard to get those oak chips particles out.
Oh, totally. That makes sense. Yeah.
So you'd probably get more. Actually, no, you would get more of the aroma and more of the oaky characteristics if I would have added it in secondary. But I know from experience, adding oak chips during secondary, it's really hard to get those particles out, and I probably would have needed to add the clay and all of the things to like clarify it better.
Well, like homebrewers, sometimes we will dry hop in bags. Can you use bags with mead, like sanitize grain or hop bag and put the oat chips in there? You could do that. Okay.
Yeah, but see, my issue is that I use the brewing bucket for primary, and then I usually transfer it to a glass carboy. And my glass carboys don't have, like the wide.
Oh no, they're the typical.
lid.
Yeah, that's the worst part about most of those.
Yeah. So I really need to switch it up maybe. And like, if I plan on, adding other additives to it, like oak chips, in bags like that, then I probably need to like do primary in the glass carboy and then, secondary in the brewing bucket. Cause then you can add like a cheesecloth with, the oak chips in it.
Yeah, totally.
But I'm so excited because I just got not a gravity filter, but a pump, to filter. So I just used that for this batch to transfer it from secondary into the keg. So now I don't have to lift the heavy glass carboys anymore. And I have the vacuum pump that does it.
Isn't that life-changing when you streamline? It's life-changing.
Yes, it's life-changing. If you can invest in that and not have to do gravity filtration anymore, and you're working with glass, I 100% recommend it.
Yeah, see, I'm stubborn 30-something-year-old with neck issues who still, my dad and I still do gravity transfers, but then I go to the ranch or go to our headquarters where Todd and them are at, and they're using pumps, and they're like, why would we not? We're old, and we have bad bats, and you're preventing that from happening. Pumps are life-changing in the brewing process. They really are. Just as it makes, especially you're doing it by yourself, right? I mean, this is a solo thing. You're like those glass carboys. Have you broken one yet in your history? It's the worst. Knock on wood. I have not broken one yet, but I know a ton of people who have, and I see the shards stuck in them, and just the mess they make and the batch they lost, and they're not hard to break, is what people don't tell you. It doesn't take a lot. It doesn't take but a few inches of drop for a full carboy to just go everywhere, to shatter.
Yeah. And in my case, all I did was like, I was moving a keg that was next to a glass carboy, and it just like tapped the glass carboy just a little bit. And that metal on glass was enough to like just shatter.
Yeah. It's heartbreaking. No, yeah. Pumps, and they're so affordable for the most part. And the bigger picture of, if you're a home brewer, regardless of the beverage, a pump can be very affordable and totally worth it, especially for transferring from vessel to vessel.
It's so much safer.
It is safe. Yeah. Safer too. I think of safety too. I was thinking of convenience, but those are together, safety and convenience in this case. So, okay. Now I think I have an understanding of everything that contributed to this batch of mead in regards to the flavors. I was still interested, where do you think the phenol for mead for this batch could have come from?
I think it's from the yeast. It's either from the yeast or the oak chips.
And it's just, is there anything that you could have done to have prevented that with?
Yeah. So with the yeast situation, it would have been maybe adding like, what do you call it? The nutrition or whatever that you add to yeast. I don't usually do that. So it's probably a good idea to like I usually do a starter, but I do it in water. I don't feed the yeast though before I add it normally. I usually just follow the back of the packet, and it's Red Star champagne yeast that I use. And usually it just tells you to start like a small starter with water. So I never, what is the nutrition that you add to yeast?
Whirlflock tablets or Irish moss? Or Camden tablets?
Yeah. Well, I do Camden tablets.
Okay. I mean, Whirlflock is what we use at the end of a boil or towards the end of a boil, and that's supposedly supposed to help with clarity. Irish moss, I think, is the literal yeast nutrient that people use for the same purpose. But yeah.
Yeah. So it's like nutrients for the yeast before you add it to the fermentation. But I don't do that. So, maybe there's a little bit of a shock there for the yeast going directly into mead, or just like letting it condition for 8 months. Like I said, like if you don't have like a good transfer from primary to secondary, and you still have some yeast in there that is dead or dying and under stress, then that's going to cause some off flavors. But also there might be some off flavors that were created from the wood chips that I added, because I didn't really I didn't really sanitize the wood chips before I put them in. So I could have added an extra step of like sanitizing the wood chips before I put them in.
I love this. The whole, just because it's so relatable to me, because like if I have an off flavor and Todd's like, what happened? I'm usually in denial, like nothing. I did everything perfect. I know I did. It was an anomaly, or your palate's wrong. You're like, yeah, I didn't really sanitize the wood chips. I guess I could have done, well, I mean, last time we used an additive, we did it in vodka, I think is what we sanitize it in. A neutral spirit, right? Just because I didn't want to make a whole batch of sanitizer. And I actually feel better about having neutral spirits, not putting any kind of flavor into my final product as opposed to some kind of actual chemical sanitizer. But do you have a preference?
Boil.
Boil.
I might have just boiled it, because a lot of times I do hot water instead of like sanitizer for like quick. Oh, I just need to like sanitize, the bubbler before I put it on. And I don't want to like pull out my sanitizer for that. So a lot of times I'll just, put a kettle on the oven and boil some water and pour it over it to sanitize it really quickly before I add it.
Absolutely. Hey, I respect your time and I appreciate you coming on the show. Before we wrap it up, you have experience with beer, with mead, with cider, seltzer, all that. Which one to you is the most accessible that you would say, hey, if you're wanting to do something outside of beer, do this and I think you're going to enjoy it?
I think cider or mead is easy. Seltzer is probably one of the easiest, just because you need, sugar and water and maybe a flavor packet for that. But yeah, I think either's easy, as long as you have access to a large quantity of apples and you want to do apples from straight apples, you can do that, or a large quantity of honey, then you can do that. But you can also buy, apple juice at the market.
Easy peasy. And this time I am going to get your mead recipe. I didn't follow up with you for the cider one, but I will follow up with you for the mead one.
Yeah. So before we go though, can I share my screen with you and show you the data from the lab?
Oh yeah. If you don't, yeah, I'd love to see that. Totally. Do I have to give you permission or how?
Yeah, you're going to give me permission.
Okay, let me, you know what? I think I have to just make you host.
I'm your new host of Homebrew Happy Hour.
You are now in charge of this show. And now you can share your screen.
Okay. Can you see the the spectra?
I do.
So this is the spectra from the mead. So every peak that you see on the spectra is one of and where it has like the yellow line, each one of these are flavors or aromas that were pulled from the data that the scientists in our lab, Nicole Corrie, ran for me. So she's able to like sit at a nose cone that is at the end of this instrument, and as each flavor or each aroma separates from the original sample, it comes off the chromatogram and it goes to this nose cone where she can sniff it. And so each smell that contributes is pulled apart and she can smell each smell individually.
What?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
That is wild. I'm trying to read them. I have to turn my head.
No. I'll share with you the list.
Okay.
So I have the list.
Is the average human supposed to do this too, or be able to?
Well, I mean, if you have a very good nose, maybe.
I don't.
Because whenever you taste it, like you can pull out certain descriptors of the flavors that you taste, right? Like maybe you don't taste the strawberry, but you taste the honey. Things like that. But these instruments kind of help you like separate out the chemical components that contribute, and then you can see them all individually.
And you'd mentioned before, a lot of brewers do this. It wasn't self-deprecating, but just how you're kind of your biggest critic. You think like, oh, I can improve on this batch and yada yada. Is there ever been a batch of any beverage you've brewed where you said, this is it, this is perfect, I would just want to replicate this from now on?
Yeah, my ciders. Whenever I make my sweet or my hopped or my dry ciders, I have those pretty ironed out, I think. But I mean, there's always something fun that you can do, like maybe use a different varietal of apples and get it, there's a lot of creative, fun spaces to live in.
All right, I'm looking at your list.
So this is the list from the chromatogram. And so each one of those peaks that were labeled with the line are shown here. And so she specifically like highlighted some that might have been off. Like, for example, at the retention time of 3 minutes that the sample was running, then it pulled off that skunky phenolic. And then the next peak that she found another off aroma was another skunky phenolic at 4 minutes. And then if you go down here, then you really get, this was like the most intense peak that was on the chromatogram, like the most highest intensity. So the highest level of smell was here. And so what she did is she took this piece from the chromatogram and pulled it out and then ran it on another column. So that way she could specifically identify the chemical component of that cut. And so whenever she pulled that cut from the chromatogram, she ran it a second time and was able to identify the specific chemical that contributed to that taste, which is guaiacol. And guaiacol is your medicinal taste that you're getting. And guaiacol is like in expectorant medicine. And like it's actually a chemical that's used in the medicinal field.
Well, you say the medicinal that you're getting. I'm not getting it. That's the problem. Now I'm concerned about my palate. Like it.
No, like I said, I back sweeten and
I covered it.
And I added, if you would have tasted this without the added strawberry or without the added honey from back sweetening, then maybe it would come through more. But I hit it.
What I need to do, I'm going to follow up with Todd. I'm talking to him here later today. I'm going to see when his mead he feels is ready so that we can then send you bottles. And we're going to pretend like you ran it through a lab, and we're just going to give it all really bad marks and just, whatever the worst at derogative descriptors we can use and be like, no, Todd, it's not us. It's the lab. The lab's found these things in your mead, man. Again, assuming the mead even exists, I'm not convinced that he didn't pitch it because I feel like it's been a year now, and that's plenty of time for mead. That's plenty of time.
Yeah. You can go ahead and taste that.
I'm going to call him out on it. I have no idea where it is or if it even exists still. But anyways, that is so cool. And this is not something the average consumer has access to. So I just want to make that clear too, especially to YouTube. If most of our audience is audio only, I highly recommend at least listening to the last, 5 minutes or whatever that we just did, the 59-minute marker or whatever, go to YouTube and look at it because that chart is impressive. But that is not something like, oh, I'm going to go down to my no, you have access to it through work.
Yeah, this is very specialized equipment that analytical chemists use in the food, flavor, beverage industry, as well as other spaces. So it's very expensive, very specialized equipment. And I'm very blessed to work with the company that I do to be able to get this data and have, coworkers that are excited to see the data and to share my hobby with. Yeah. And they're just as excited about the data as I am.
It's probably cost prohibitive for the average man to go, hey, lab, what would it cost to do my, run this batch through? They're $10,000.
Yeah, well, there are consultants that do this, and they do own our equipment and they'll run samples. But yeah, they're consultants, and they usually work with like breweries or wineries, and the winery will send them a sample that's a trouble sample, and they'll be like, I just don't know what's going on here. Can you help me like identify and troubleshoot what the issue is? And they'll work with them in that manner.
Yeah. In the meantime, we encourage friends of the show to just send it to me, and I'll tell you this was good or this was not as good. I give great feedback. Corrie, I really do. I appreciate your time. Thank you for coming and doing the show again. People can find what you're doing. Instagram's still the main place at Miss_Cider. Is that correct?
Yeah, now it's at MS_cider. I changed it from MISS to MS.
I didn't even notice. How rude of me. Normally, I don't notice the haircuts. Did you get a haircut too? Your hair looks nice. That's the first thing women always tell me I don't notice is the hair. I live in a house full of women and 3 daughters and a wife. And if my wife ever cuts their hair and I don't notice, it's the end of the world for me. Yeah. But so MS_cider on Instagram. That's the best place to find everything, what you're doing. Follow her. Your page is always entertaining, and I'm going to send you a gazillion questions, follow-ups from people who write me and go, Josh, why didn't you ask this about mead? This is the most obvious thing. And I'll just forward it all your way, and we'll do a follow-up at some point. But I will follow up with the mead recipe, and we might as well publish the cider one too that I never followed up on. But
sure.
Thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure talking to you again, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, Josh. Have a good one.
You too. And that will do it for this episode of the Homebrew Happy Hour. If you have a question you would like us to discuss on a future episode, go to homebrewhappyhour.com and click on that submit a question link at the top of the page, or you could be Todd's best friend if you leave us a voicemail at 325-305-6107. Brew better beer with the new Grainfather G40 all-in-one electric system, available now at grainfather.com. Also, get a pack of Imperial Yeast along with one of our premium recipes when you join our Trub Club. Go to patreon.com/homebrew happy hour and come brew with us. On behalf of Todd Burns, James Carlson, and the Pearl Media Network, I'm Joshua Stubing. Thank you for listening.